Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. India is staring at 50% tariffs on exports to America after the additional 25% penalty levy came into force this week. More than 60% of India's exports to the US now face 50% tariffs. Only India and Brazil have been hit with the highest tariff rate of 50%. President Trump has accused India of fueling Moscow's war machine by buying Russian oil. The United States has also ramped up the rhetoric. Earlier this week, trade advisor Peter Navarro termed Indian negotiators arrogant and dubbed Russia's Ukraine invasion as Modi's war. Later, in an exclusive post on social media, Navarro highlighted that the 50% tariffs are also aimed at cutting off the financial lifeline India has extended to the Putin war machinery. He wrote that before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russian oil made up less than 1% of India's imports, and today it accounts for over 30%, amounting to more than 1.5 million barrels a day. Navarro also claiming that all the proceeds from buying Russian oil flow into Indian energy companies and directly into Putin's war chest. The big question we're asking today is, who is really funding the Ukraine war, and why is the United States targeting India when China and EU are bigger buyers of Russian oil? We will come to that in just a bit, but first, hear out what US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had to say.
President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have very good relationships at that level. And it's not just over the Russian oil. The Indians came in very early after Liberation Day to start negotiating on tariffs, and we still don't have a deal. I thought that we would have a deal in May, June. I thought India could be one of the earlier deals. And they've kind of tapped us along in terms of the negotiations. And then there is also the aspect of the Russian crude purchases, which they've been profiteering on. So there are many levels going on here. I do think India is the world's largest democracy. The U.S. is the world's largest economy. I think at the end of the day, we will come together.
While White House Trade and Manufacturing Advisor Peter Navarro has blamed India for giving a financial lifeline to Putin's war machinery by buying Russian oil, statistics show India is not the only buyer of discounted Russian crude. If you look at the top 5 buyers till August this year, then India is not alone. According to data sourced from Kepler, China is the biggest buyer at 1.8 to 1.9 million barrels per day, followed by India at 1.7 million barrels per day, Turkey at number 3 at 305,000 barrels per day, and Syria and Brunei. This trend continued in August, with China being the biggest buyer, followed by India, then Turkey at number 3 and Syria at number 4, followed by Azerbaijan. Going forward, in September, China is expected to remain the biggest buyer of Russian crude, followed by India, and Russian crude imports by Turkey too will also remain steady. Purchase of Russian oil by India, like in the case of China and Turkey, has led to cost savings for the country. Now, as per Kepler, if the average imports are 1.7 million barrels per day and the average discount is $5 per barrel, then the annual saving would be $3.1 billion, and with higher discounts, the saving could rise to $5 to $7 billion as well. While Navarro has blamed Indian refiners for flipping black market Russian crude and selling it in the international market for profits, here's what the data shows. India's total exports of oil and petroleum products in 2025 was 1.3 million barrels per day. Exports were for largely refined products like diesel, jet fuel and naphtha. Now, this is also done by other nations. This was driven by India's strong refining sector and re-export of Russian crude derived fuels, which other nations also do. Finally, who are the major buyers of Indian energy exports? You've got UAE at 142,000 barrels per day, Singapore at 135,000 barrels per day. Then you've got Australia at 80,000 barrels per day, US at 80,000 barrels per day, and Netherlands at 60,000 barrels per day. To take this discussion forward, we are now joined by Mohan Kumar, former ambassador, and Ashok Malik, partner and chair of the India practice for the Asia Group. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, gentlemen. Ambassador Kumar, let me begin by asking you. We have President Trump's advisor, Peter Navarro, saying that 50% tariffs on Indian imports are now in effect. This isn't just about India's unfair trade. It's about cutting off the financial lifeline India has extended to Putin's war machine. He has also gone on to say India uses our dollars to buy discounted Russian crude. How do you see this argument that the US and Peter Navarro are making to justify these penalty tariffs against India?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I think, frankly, that the arguments are fallacious at best and outrageous at worst. There is absolutely no basis for this claim. You actually, what India is doing is they're maintaining the price stability of international oil. That's number one. Number two, we are taking care of energy poverty in our country, which is a very serious problem. And last but not least, we are also in compliance with international law. Not very much into the past, the US was actually telling us continue to buy, otherwise price of the oil will shoot up. I think, frankly, it's very hard to think of it as nothing other than a pretext by Peter Navarro. The way things are working in DC now is that if the boss wants a line and there is only one man who is calling the shots, other people are just latching on, piling on to it and giving different reasons as to why the argument is correct and the decision is correct. So frankly, the only argument I would say, Parikshit, frankly, which has a bit of merit, everything else is absolutely outrageous, but the one argument that Peter Navarro makes, and I want to tackle it if you don't mind, is that he says we increased our share of Russian oil from something like 1% to 30% of our crude imports. That, I think, is a valid point. The only argument we can make against it is that we actually have 400 to 500 million people who live in energy poverty, as I call it. There is a symbiotic link between economic poverty and energy poverty, and we have to deal with it. And wherever we get cheap oil prices, we simply have to buy. The argument that we import oil, then refine it, and then export it to make money is a load of rubbish. Because if you look at the statistics of exports of refined petroleum products from India to the world, they have remained constant. So really the only argument is, before the conflict erupted in Ukraine, Russian oil constituted only 1%. Today, it is true that it constitutes 32%, but there is a very, very good reason for it. The Europeans stopped buying Russian oil prices crashed. It was in our interest to buy oil. It was not to profiteer. It was to take care of the energy security of at least 500 million people in India who live in energy poverty.
Right. And as we've shown also on the program earlier, India is not the only buyer of Russian energy. China is the biggest buyer. You've got countries like Turkey as well. Let me go across to Ashok Malik at this point. Mr. Malik, you know, Peter Navarro, and I'm also reading from his thread, he's gone on to say that Indian refiners, with their silent Russian partners, refine and flip the black market oil for big profits on the international market, while Russia pockets hard currency to fund its war on Ukraine. Now, this is unfair against India because, you know, for a very long time, there have been countries which have been buying Indian energy products. Also, there are other nations which buy Russian crude, refine it, and then sell those products as well.
2 points here, Parikshit. Thank you for having me. One needs to recognize that India has fairly modern refineries, as opposed to countries in the West which have refineries of an earlier age. Indian refineries have a very high complexity index, which means they can refine all types of crude, which is why they source crude from across the world, including now Russian crude, which is actually very high sulfur crude, and they do it well. So refining is a strength of India, irrespective of the Ukraine conflict, irrespective of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And India is a big exporter of refined petroleum, of refined crude products to various countries, including European countries. Second, in terms of hard currency being earned by Russia, by Putin's Russia, thanks to India, you know, quite honestly, Putin's Russia is earning hard currency from a variety of sources. Energy crude oil and refined oil are being bought by not just Turkey. They're being bought by China, by India, by a number of European countries which have carve-outs. LNG and natural gas is being bought by a variety of European countries. Crude oil refined in India is being sold to European countries and to the US. Uranium is being bought from Russia by the US. 20% of the uranium used in nuclear plants in the US today comes from Russia. Exports to Russia continue. The European Union has officially slashed its exports to Russia, but unofficially, exports to Central Asian countries and the Caucasus countries have ballooned, have surged, and that is now seen as a route for transshipment of exports from Europe, is particularly from Germany and Italy to Russia, which is benefiting Russia and benefiting Europe as well. So why India is being singled out for not breaking any rules, but adhering to an internationally determined price cap and importing crude oil from Russia defeats me. It's completely preposterous and is not fair at all. It leads me to believe that there's perhaps something else behind this campaign against India. It's not about Russia or about Ukraine or about crude oil at all. It is another form of coercion related to our trade negotiations with the US.
That's an important point. Let me go back to Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Peter Navarro has gone on to say that India's big oil lobby has turned the largest democracy in the world into a massive refining hub and oil money laundromat for the Kremlin. Indian refiners buy cheap Russian oil, process it and export fuels to Europe, Africa and Asia, shielded from sanctions under the pretense of neutrality. But the fact is, Indian refiners, the Indian government, we've always followed international law and internationally laid down norms.
Yes, in addition to what Mr. Malik said, I think it was a valid point that, there is a degree of complexity involved. I also made a point earlier, which I'd like to reiterate, which is that our refined petroleum exports have remained more or less consistent. So that argument falls flat, frankly. I don't think it is true at all that we are used as a laundromat. I really believe this is part of pre-negotiation posturing, and it's a way of ratcheting up pressure on India ahead of the trade negotiations, which are continuing. That is really the only reason I can think of. And just to put it in perspective, if you look at bilateral trade between Russia and various countries, and I'm not just talking of oil, but also talking of liquefied natural gas, and other products, the India-Russia trade is about $68.7 billion US dollars. EU-Russia is $78 billion. So actually EU trades more with Russia in dollar terms than India. And yet EU got away with 15% tariff while we are stuck with 50% tariff. China does trade to the extent of $130 billion with Russia. And today, their trade negotiator is in Washington. They are having trade talks, and it is very likely they end up with a tariff which is below India. So frankly, it doesn't make sense. And frankly, it defies logic. So whichever way you look at it, the only argument, as I said earlier, Parikshit, which can be made in good faith is we imported only 1% of our requirements from Russia before the conflict. After the conflict, we have gone up to 32%. As I said, we are doing the world a favor, because if we also started buying oil at higher prices, the price of Brent crude would shoot up, and that would affect everybody, including the United States. Secondly, you cannot ignore the energy security needs of 400 to 500 million people in this country. Everybody cannot pay more for petrol, diesel, and so on. It is an imperative necessity that India fulfills the energy security of its population, which lives below the poverty line.
Right. Ashok Malik, the US officials and Peter Navarro have also gone on to say that India slaps some of the highest tariffs in the world on US products, uses US dollars to buy Russian oil. How would you respond to this? Because we also have to see the US-India partnership in a larger light, in a more long-term light. This is a relationship that both nations have been investing in for over 2 decades.
Look, there are two things here. One, India sells to a lot of countries, sells a lot of goods to a lot of countries. It sells goods and services to the US, to Europe, and so on. The money it makes from those sales, it uses to buy goods from many countries, including the US. So, that is what international trade is about. That is trade 101. You can't say that the money India earns from the US, it spends on Russia. That sort of granularity is simply not possible. That's not how international trade is calibrated. Second, by making this point about India's so-called high tariffs and how India is beggaring the US, this actually gives away the game. The game is really about coercing India to make even greater concessions in its trade negotiations with the US. The Indian trade negotiators have made a very ambitious and a very good offer to the US, which offers deeper tariff cuts for US imports into India, as well as a wider basket of goods to which market access is being made available. Now, obviously, the US wants more, which is fair enough, but it doesn't want more by negotiating at the table. It wants more by using extraneous factors such as this one. And in a sense, Peter Navarro is the silent trade negotiator for the US. That's the only way I can interpret this.
Okay, I'm going to take a short break, but I'll request both Ashok Malik and Ambassador Mohan Kumar to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. We're discussing the impact of 50% tariff on Indian products being exported to the United States. And Peter Navarro, White House Trade and Manufacturing Advisor to the President, he has gone on to say that India is fueling Russia's war against Ukraine. Let me get in Ambassador Mohan Kumar at this point. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Peter Navarro had said that things don't stop here. India continues to buy Russian weapons while demanding that US firms transfer sensitive military technology and build plants in India. This is strategic freeloading. While, yes, we have a dependence on Russian defense sector, we do import a lot of defense products to Russia because there is a long-standing partnership. But at the same time, we have been increasing our imports from US of defense equipments on a year-on-year basis.
So it shows a complete absence of what has happened between India and the United States over the last 25 years. And that is what pains me, frankly. As a longtime Foreign Service officer, I joined the service in 1981 when really our worldview was very different. But following the nuclear tests in 98 and then from 2000 onwards, there has been such a gigantic effort, a monumental effort on the part of people in India and the United States to build this strategic partnership brick by brick. And so if you come today and tell me that, listen, why are you buying Russian weapons and, that's bad and so on, that just betrays a complete lack of what has happened between India and the United States over the last 25 years. Anybody will tell you that in 2000, the defense relationship between India and the US was virtually zero, complete zero. And today, if you take the kind of defense partnership we have, which runs into billions of dollars, I think you will easily see that India has made a good faith effort not to put all its eggs in one basket and try to diversify. Of course, not just with the US, but also with Israel, also with France, and so on. So frankly, what can I say to that point, except that it's a very short-sighted view and it does not take into account the monumental changes that have happened and that have made leaders on both sides say just a year or two ago that this is the most consequential partnership, the most defining partnership for the 21st century. So what do you want me to say? I mean, I think somebody has to look at what has happened to the relationship over the last 10 years, 20 years, and then take the medium to long view. But that is not what is being done. So frankly, Parikshit, my analysis is that there are three reasons why I think the US is behaving the way it is. Number one, President Trump may not be seeing India as a counterweight to China. And that's an important point, because if you stop seeing India as a counterweight to China, then you start treating India very differently. So maybe there is a recalibration going on in President Trump's mind. There are other factors as well which have nothing to do with trade, but I see that you want to also conclude your show, but I'll stop here.
Yes.
I think I'm
Mohan
merely
Kumar.
saying that you need an appreciation of the relationship to understand better. That's all.
That's true. My final question to Ashok Malik, very quickly, sir, we've run out of time. Peter Navarro has said that if India, the world's largest democracy, wants to be treated like a strategic partner of the US, it needs to act like one. The road to peace in Ukraine runs through New Delhi. If you had to give advice on how to stop the war in Ukraine, what would you say and respond?
Look, I'm not here to solve the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I think to expect India to resolve that problem is a bit rich. Even if India stops buying oil from Russia, the fact is the war will not stop. That oil will then go to China. China will buy it, store it for its own use. It might not export it. It might keep it for its own use. And Mr. Putin and the Russian government will keep making money. That is the blunt truth. So if the war has to be stopped, Mr. Trump is negotiating between President Zelensky and President Putin. He has to find a way. The road to peace does lie through Delhi.
All right. Road to peace in Ukraine doesn't lie through Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Malik and Ambassador Mohan Kumar, for joining us on the program. We've completely run out of time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.